Yeah, that's what we said. All right, good. All right, so Dave talked there on some very practical, starting to really kind of lean into showing us some practical ways that he does his cohort and residency. And in the binders, again, like we said, that first section is part of his work that he's doing with his D-men. And so there's like 5 churches that are in that one whole section, that thicker section. Then you flip to the next tab, and it's a different church that we contacted and asked, what are you doing? Ones that are kind of known that they're doing it fairly well. Then the next tab, and so on and so forth. So that's really for you to take back and just look through and figure out and pull what you like or have questions about, things like that. So I want to discuss that a little bit more, and if you guys have questions about residencies, internships, those things. We talked earlier about the heart behind it, the reason, and then Dave was getting into more of the how. And so do you guys have, it could be about that particular topic. If there's something else that you really wanted to ask from yesterday, but you really didn't, but now you feel comfortable doing so, you can do that as well. But while they're still with us for this last hour here, what questions would you have for them from our time together overall? What do you guys have?
Have all of you had interns? Has it worked out? I'll say, how's it worked out?
Have all the interns worked out well?
We have had interns. We've had, we started off with 2 paid interns. We now call those pastoral assistant residents. And by God's grace, they have worked out well. The cohort is a broader group we got 10 men in that now. And effectively what we get to do is see these 10 men, and then we'll choose one to be the resident. So that allows us to have a better shot at success if someone who's not going to come in and maybe be something different than we thought.
Yeah, most of ours have worked out pretty well, but there have been 2 or 3 along the way that just didn't pan out well. But I look at that's still very positive, because what you're doing, you're able to speak into some guys' lives to encourage them not to try to go pastor a church or go be a missionary, because you recognize they don't have either the character or the capacity to do that. So you're really serving churches, even if it doesn't pan out well. You're learning things, you're learning discernment, or becoming discerning, and you're helping to protect other churches or other mission groups. Because Billy, you've seen some people become part of mission teams, and you've probably gone, how in the world did a church let them come over here? And so that's part of what you're doing in this. So even if it doesn't pan out, it's still panning out in a different way. Not what you expected, but the Lord still uses that. And I think it helps those individuals that maybe got all inspired, they wanted to do something in ministry, and then they realize, no, I don't need to do that. And I don't know any of these that didn't pan out, that I don't think any of them abandoned the faith or anything like that. And some of them served in churches and continue to serve in some different ways, but not with the intentions they originally had.
Yeah, as far as and Dave, I don't know how it all got started with you guys. I know that when you guys got started, you had a pretty quick takeoff in the ministry. It was unusual. For us, this is the first year in our church we're going to have a resident intern. But we've had other men come through, of course, that we've trained and we've helped send out. But, and I've also had a guy who came to me for intern type training, but as soon as he didn't, we started dealing with things in his life, he decided to quit and move on. So I've also had that experience, but as far as the level of kind of internship that Dave's doing, we have not been able to do. That's amazing in so many ways what's going on there at Oakhurst. But when did it get started with you guys?
Back really at the beginning of our church, with this guy that I mentioned this morning, that's in Brazil. in some ways, this go back to Furlan, in some ways, it fell into my lap, but that was God's providence at work. So look and see what falls in your lap. So yeah, it started really at the beginning, and we ended up calling this guy an intern at some point. I don't remember what year it was, and he was around for 5 years, I think, before he went to Albania as a missionary. And we sent him over so we could check things out. We sent a team over shortly after he got there. I was on that team.
So I think it's really interesting that you started off with one guy and you were willing to spend that 5 years with him.
Yeah.
And then to see him go to the mission field. So just even, I think just going back to your talk and thinking through different fits and different ways to do it, what a tremendous investment that you guys did. It may have seemed like 5 years for an intern. That guy's serving the Lord overseas now. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and when he went to Albania, it was right after the Albania was open. And you couldn't get in. It was the most closed country in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and it was an atheistic country, very oppressive. And so this guy goes in right afterwards, and I actually found out about the opportunity and told him about it, and he was there within 4 or 5 months. And then by the time our group went over to see him, it was still, I thought, this is like living in the 1950s. I mean, literally, it felt like that. It was so oppressive, and the looks on people's faces, and the suffering folks had gone through, and the deprivation. And during those 5 years, the Lord prepared this brother in so many ways for different things going on in his life so that he would be effective on it. He needed those 5 years, I think.
So, Johnny, going off of what you were saying there too. So I think with the cohort, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, that was really coming from guys who are already in the church. These are the ones that are already there. Whereas the residency idea, internship, you could kind of go either way. It's kind of, the definitions and things kind of get confusing. But I think for you guys, the residency is somebody coming from the outside, maybe, unless they come up to that cohort and then transition over.
The residency every time has been somebody who's about to graduate seminary, so they did come from the outside, but they also joined our church and they came through the cohort.
Came through the cohort there. And so that, it's very similar to what Liam, or there's similarities there with what Liam Garvey, who's with Pillar as well. He's the international director, I think is what we call him, in the Pillar Network, over in Scotland. And that's what he has. They have a great residency program there, and the way he does his is in the binder for you. And they have kind of 2 tracks, if you will. One is just, should I be in the ministry? Just period. And you got to go through that one. And then there are some of those guys that they then kind of transition to, okay, now I'd like to be a pastor, and that one's a longer commitment. I want to say, Jake, you remember, is it 2 years or 3 years?
3, I think.
3 years once they commit to that, as far as the pastoral one. And so the churches, the idea would be that you have training, you have discipleship, where you're raising up people within your own church. And then the question is, do you also want to try to be a church that you could bring somebody in from the outside and give them opportunities that they can't get somewhere else or that they're struggling with? And so those would be I think, things that we're talking about here with that.
And the point of the internship, I love it, just highlights cooperation. And I think that's what we've benefited from so much. So we have a local help of having men who come to study at the seminary around the corner from us to get an MDiv. Now, we hired one of those guys out of a group that just graduated with 5. We don't have enough money to hire all of them in a residency. We can't do 6 spots like the church I served at in DC does. We can do 1. But then Ed Moore in New York City had a spot. And a guy went up to serve with Ed Moore. And Jeremy Rennie down in Sandoval Island Community Church had a spot. We didn't have a spot with the paid position. They did. They get to continue their ministry of training before Lord willing they become pastors. And so it'd be the same thing here. If you open up a spot, then you're committing to training a young man who could serve your church while he's here, and you could participate investing in it. And that man may come from Raleigh. We got Southeastern Seminary, a bunch of guys coming out looking for places to land.
I think that was a really strong part of Dave's talk, because I never thought about doing things like that. It was Dave King who said, "I've got guys, Garrett. Why don't you help us?" He's like, "Can I send you some? We'd like to be able to talk." And I think you were pushing me to do the same thing. I didn't even think in terms of, hey, you got a guy? Yeah, I just didn't think of asking that until some other guys challenged me on, hey, we got guys, but we don't know what to do with them. You might have a house and meals and actual real training that could help this guy. And we'll see what the kingdom work can grow from this situation.
And part of that, even within Pillar, is there's actual internships and things overseas at churches that we're partnering with. And so it might be that, you know, somebody with their name starts with a Z, perhaps, and a new member in our church that's baptized, and you know, he's saying, I'm really interested in missions. This is just hypothetical. I'm really interested in missions. And you could, you know, the connection there, you could say, well, we've got a guy, but where we live might be a challenge to do that. But a church has a spot in Dubai. Maybe we can send him there. And they might say, we've got a spot, we've got a house, but we don't have the monthly, you know, what he's going to need monthly. And so then that's where, you know, we would talk there. Or Ferlin and them might say, we don't have the guy, we're not overseas, we got a little bit of money that we'd be glad to help send him there, so we have the spot and then a little bit of money there, and you can put it together to give people an opportunity. So that giving those people on the ground experience in the churches, which again, as they said many times, is that's where the training really needs to happen, and you can bring seminary and things alongside of it.
Can you explain the difference with Josh and what's his name? Joshua?
And Jacob?
Jacob
Uh-huh.
was, were they the same position? Is it
Yeah.
the same? Okay.
The one that we had?
Yeah.
So we've had a couple internships. This is a process, as you guys know. And it's usually something, I love what you said there, Ron, just like, get started doing something, and then you're gonna probably end up tweaking it a good bit and changing some things. That's what it's been for us. And so the internship with Josh was similar to the one with Jacob, as far as coming from the outside,
Okay.
getting experience, being here, and then with the intention, with being intentional to send him out. I think the difference with Josh was he was kind of hoping to come here, be trained, and then possibly in his mind become an elder here and stay here. What the challenge we ended up seeing was with that internship, through that internship, we realized he's not ready for that. He needs to go be in the world and work and just, you know, just learn to be a husband and a father and things like that, be a faithful church member. And so then that spot that he had, because it was funded, we couldn't keep him in that spot. So thus he had to move on. So then Jacob's coming to that spot, but the intention with him would be, hopefully, Lord willing, to train him up, and then he wants to go back where he was to plant the church. Yeah, good. Other questions for these brothers? Yeah.
Well, I was curious, I know we've been talking about people where it's to be pastors, but I was just curious about your elders. How many of your elders, do they ever, you know, do y'all train them up, or how do you go about it if somebody's interested? How do you build up your elders in your church?
Well, I mean, we've developed that as time went on. It really did start as simple as like a man in a book. So one of our first, I mean, it really did. So I mean, I was able to replant with 3 elders from the onset, so that was a benefit. But the first guy we raised up, like after our replant, when we were there in the church, every guy was just a brother who had come around. He'd moved in town, and he and his wife were working. They were doing great in the ministry. They're both engineers with Google. They'd come in town to do Google Fiber. And he came to me after 2 years. He said, man, Google's going to move me down to Columbia, South Carolina. And I said, well, would you consider getting a different job to stay here? You know, you're doing great here. You know, you guys are doing well spiritually. Google's going to move from Columbia to somewhere else after that. You came from Abu Dhabi, UAE, to Charlotte. Where else are they going to send you? Why don't you plant roots here? And he went home, talked with his wife, and they prayed about it and said, okay, we're going to get engineer jobs here in town, stay. And that allowed him to keep on. It was back when I just led a group of like 5 men, and we read through books. And I totaled it up. He and I probably read through 19 books together in that group. And there was good fruit that the elder saw in his life, and so we started talking to him about serving as an elder. So that's how he came up. Today, the cohort serves as that. So the 10 guys in the group, right now, 4 of them are potential lay elders. The guys that are seminary students are in their 20s and 30s. But I've had a man in there that's in his 60s. I've got a man right now who's like in his late 50s. And they're in there training side by side with seminary guys. They're 26, 27.
Yeah, we, a number of the guys that served as elders came through our internship. What I did was, I didn't put a time limit on it, I kept it open, because I was mentoring, discipling, training, pastoral internship. One of those guys went out and pastored another church in the community, and then several more of them became elders in our church.
I was just curious how many, through the,
Kidani?
Berlin.
Oh, from
Berlin came up through, and went out, and I was just curious how many of your elders go
Yeah,
on.
maybe,
go out.
could you say a percentage of elders that have been raised, I mean, your church is, you've not been there that long yet, but percentage of elders who were raised up just in your church that ended up going out and serving
Either
somewhere?
missionary field.
Mission.
Or
Yeah, ours, in terms of being installed as elders, we had this guy go out and pastor in the Memphis area. There are some other guys, had they hung around a little bit longer and toured a little bit more, would have been elders, but we were able to gladly send them out to pastors. So out of our number of elders, I think there was just that one guy that became a pastor. But they were like your guys, who come to elders meetings and all of that.
And so some of those guys were kind of there, qualified, but they ended up going to places that were
Yeah.
installed as elders.
Well, and then two of them came on staff in our church.
Okay.
And so I guess you could say three guys.
Yeah, I invested a lot of time in training the man. He was a real leader in our church, and we were in that. This is just one guy I can think of particularly. We were preparing him for that. Military moved him, as it happens a lot in our area, and he took all that equipment and has helped. He's been in 2 or 3 different churches, and he's been an elder in every one of them. And he's talked about the formation he had at La Plata prepared him to go help these other churches. And so we've seen that happen with a few guys.
So kind of a sent out, but the world, but under the Lord's providence, they were sent out and really impacting the kingdom.
Well, it's like what you've been emphasizing. It hurts to lose those kind of guys because you love the stability they bring to the church, but we got to be willing to give up our best and go help others. And so that guy's actually he's coming to preach at our church this Sunday. And so the church is so excited to have him back. He could be an elder next week if he came back probably, but he was so beloved. But just I was able to read through a lot of things with him, take him to T4G with me, go to just take him along and invite him into so many things. And his hunger just kept that going, and his character, and all those things. But that's just one example of a guy that we've seen go. Just you investing in men, you may not get to keep them. You may have to give them up, and that's a beautiful thing.
Okay. Mr. Dubb.
Yeah, the programs and the training that you guys have, it's just fascinating to me. They're obviously from very large churches, whereas many of us have a small church background, and it's hard for us to wrap our mind around comparing what we have with what you have. Could I ask each one of the three of you just to give me a number? Roughly how big are your churches?
The church that I pastored had, depending on the season, between 150 and 180.
Okay, that's not all.
No,
No, consistently through all the exits and reentries that we've had with all the government workers and whatnot, we always run somewhere between 120 and some odd people in church, but we have 70 covenant members consistently. We just keep losing, and the Lord keeps replacing exactly over the years.
We're right now, we're a little over 300 members, but
He's a mega church pastor.
that's a mega church. But yeah, I think what I wanted to say earlier is that even what we were doing, we did when we were smaller. So when we were 60 members, we did have 2 interns. Now, we didn't have the money to fund them, but we went and talked to other churches who helped provide support for them. So I think sometimes thinking outside the box, again, with cooperation, you might have some guys, but not the money. You might have the money, but not some guys. We did that when we were 60 members.
Dave, in your years with college ministry, did you have to go do fundraising and support stuff?
I had to raise a lot of money.
And I think that's why it's really good to hear from you, because I had no experience and felt awkward asking for those kinds of things. And just seeing, like, he just had that gift and instinct to go and say boldly, I think you should support this particular work. I just think that's a great idea for some of us who don't think in those terms.
But what we're running right now, the cohort, any church could do it because we're doing it at night. It's on a weeknight, and so we have the very idea of, like, if we wanted to have someone move to our church, we wouldn't start them off as an intern. We'd probably start them off in the cohort. So move to town, get a job. There's people in the church that rent rooms out to people. You could rent a room and be a part of our church for a year, and that could be one way to do it. It doesn't cost the church any money that any size church could do.
Yeah, and out of the guys that we trained and sent out or that remained in the church, I think there were a half a dozen that we gave some kind of compensation for. Two of those guys, one was with us for 2 summers, and he got room and board at one of our elders' home, and now they look at him like he's a grandson. And that guy's 3 sons are great-grandchildren to them. And we gave him a small stipend, and he's pastoring a pretty good-sized church now in Nashville, and doing an amazing work. The other guy was one I told you about that I basically said, if you don't shape up, you gotta ship out, and I didn't give him a good commendation. 2 more are on staff with us, and they had small stipends, and then 2 other ones were sent out, I think, and they just had small stipends for a short period of time. So, and we actually, for a big part of that, the funding came from outside our church because we didn't have the money to do it. And so somebody provided the money, and I think, if you can find some people that are willing to invest in that, then go for it.
And I think the resource you all have here at your church, so it's like we've got guys in seminary who are coming out, and I'm trying to encourage many of them, because church planting is what a lot want to do because they think it's easier. Some aspects are more simple. I don't know if easier or more simple, but then there's so many opportunities in our area for revitalization. The chance to come to a church like this and do an internship at a church that, just to see the story of what God's doing here, could very well prepare a guy to go and be a pastor leading revitalization somewhere else. The average Southern Baptist church size right now, Phil, what is that, the average size?
The average size is under 75, I believe, like 60 to 75. So, when you talk about however many tens of thousands of churches we have, most of them are pretty small. So we all think what we've been talking about, any of those churches can do. They're not just spending money. If you come up with some books, and we did give our guys books, so I would find a way to find some money for books, and I'd give guys books.
We like giving away books.
Billy's a man after my own heart.
That's mostly because all the books come from him or people he knows. Gives us discount. They give them to us and we just give them out. It's great. Yeah, Wayne, what do you have?
And when you say you have paid elders, I'm assuming that's a full-time job that you actually pay this person to work? Like you put a pastor?
Yeah, so pastors and elders in the same office. So pastors
Well, it
typically.
is here, but you said, well, no, it wasn't you, it was the guy that left.
Yeah, I think you was talking
Jason,
about
Jason.
a compensated, somebody's a
Compensated
resident.
elder. You said you had 2 paid elders, I think you said, or something like that, or did I mishear you?
We've got 4, including myself, pastors that are in the pay of the church, and we have
But
3
they're elders,
pastor elders that are lay elders who are not in the pay of the
preaching
church.
elders.
Yeah. So I think they would say, so sometimes the term pastor will just go with the preaching guy, but really, for all of them, you have 7 elders or 7 pastors, and you said 4 are paid and 3 are not. 7 total, and not all of the preaching guy. Some are associates or whatever you call them.
Correct, yeah, so we've got 2 associates and 1 assistant. Our church constitution spells out what those are and what they do. That's also another role of training. One of our associates right now, I expect he'll be a senior pastor one day. So he's grown tremendously as a preacher and is being able to get more reps. He chairs our elder board now and is getting that experience and doing a fantastic job with it. So I think those associate assistant pastor roles are also wonderful training roles if the Lord might call that guy to be a senior pastor somewhere or a church planter or something like that.
Just, because I can't hear, you're saying reps, you mean opportunities to preach?
Reps, yeah, repetitions, preaching reps, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. Heather and I were talking this morning. Ed, you had a good question yesterday about, seminary. I just assume you have a bunch of opportunities to preach and teach. And, just like if you were in mechanic school, you obviously worked on cars, hopefully. But in seminary, it's different. And like the brothers were sharing, you might preach a few short sermons in your preaching class. If the local churches don't open that up, then guys do not have those opportunities. When I came to you guys, you were probably my 8th sermon in my life. And so...
I still have a hard time wrapping my head around that.
Yeah.
We do too.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think, you're training these men, and there again, I don't know anything about seminary, but in my head, you're training these men to go out and minister to people and preach the gospel, and you're giving them all this knowledge, this book knowledge,
Yeah. Go on, Ed.
to prepare them.
Yeah.
And then everything that they're supposed to do when
Yeah.
they get out, you don't give them an opportunity.
You were right on target, and this is a conversation I've had with Al Moeller, Danny Aiken. Danny's really inclined to it, and Al Moeller has been as well. I've had it with Jason Allen. I've had maybe a little smaller degree with David Dockery, and I don't know the other guys.
These are the
I mean, I know
presidents
their
of
names,
some of the
but-
different seminaries he's talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you're talking to the presidents. I hope that you talk to more and more senior pastors about doing that
Yes.
in their church.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the more of these people will disagree with me, that's okay, but the more of these campuses where a pastor's being pumped in is one more spot where a guy in that church cannot get help to be trained to be
Yep.
preaching.
Yep.
So, it's,
Are you saying that video screens do not train pastors? I'm just saying.
Apparently there's even hologram machines now. I've heard about that happening. Like the church has invested
Yeah.
that much money into that rather than investing in their guys to train them to preach. And it's gonna hurt the body, it's gonna, and that kind of pastor-centric model is gonna keep hurting the church.
I wanna
think we
connect
talk
the-
to pastors.
I want to connect the dots with something Joni said and get you, Jacob. When she was saying, there are some challenges with other guys preaching, and it can be a little hard to listen to and things. Where else are they going to get the chance, right? And so this is why it's important to make sure churches are aware of this, because like you're saying, we know this, and then, well, do you want to make space? Do you view this, and I think these brothers have made great arguments, is this a primary role of the ministry of a pastor and of the church? If the answer is yes, then we have to figure out how to do these things well and be willing to sacrifice a little bit on some things to make sure that we're helping the kingdom. Heather, Jacob, then Furlan.
And Daniel nailed that yesterday when he was talking about the churches around Graceful, that being willing to open their doors. This is where we need to find venues, and if that's a retirement home, a nursing home, anything like that, if you can get a venue. I mean, I used to go preach at the nursing home when I was a teenager, and I cut my teeth preaching there. And you look for those opportunities.
You said a nursing, so you cut your teeth while they were providing for you.
Heather, what question did you have?
So, with everything that a pastor has to do and all the emotions and things like that, sometimes it can be a little wearing to, kind of constantly pour in and send out and things like that. Do you guys have any sort of rhythm of rest in it? In that internship, do you, train for a little while and then you rest? Is that all that included in like sabbatical? Or how does rest come into it?
I think this is where you learn some things along the way How much can I go? When do I need to put a pause on it? So what I tried to do was, early on, I was doing internship meeting every week and doing everything else, and I was only full-time staff member. And I was just blowing and going and doing all that. And then I realized I'm gonna burn out. And so I changed it, we met every other week. And then we did monthly, really intense times, but we did it monthly. So what I try to encourage pastors, look at yourself, look at your capacity, look at your context. It's not gonna be like anyone else. So you don't have to copy anyone else. You look at your capacity, you look at your context, you look at the guys you're trying to train, because they all have oddball schedules. And as a pastor, you really have an oddball schedule. So you have to work together to find something that will accommodate well. Now, that's where if you have the finances and can bring a guy in, then it's a whole different ballgame. So the guys that we were able to compensate for 3 summers and a few semesters with some other guys, they were in, so I had a lot more time to pour into them, and I could give them assignments, and we could sit around the coffee pot and talk preaching. I mean, there were all kinds of opportunities like that. They could, at the drop of a hat, go do a hospital visit with me. So those kind of things were easy. It's harder when you can't pay to have somebody there so you can train them. So it's harder in terms of figuring out the schedule. But I think you really have to have good conversations, and I encourage you to have good conversations with your spouse. One of my friends has a very intense paid residency, lots going on, and every once in a while I'm getting in his ear and I'm saying, you gotta pause, you gotta back off some. So I get concerned about that, because I've got a pretty good capacity, but I've learned over the years, when I get to the edge, I've got to pull back. So this is where you learn the rhythm of your life. You're not going to learn it in a couple of years. It takes you time to do that in ministry. So you're learning the rhythm, you're learning the context of the church, you're learning the context of those you're trying to train, you're thinking about your family, and you have to put some parameters in. Don't try to copy someone else. Learn from them. Take this binder, learn from it, get some ideas, but as Jerry Vines used to say, milk a lot of cows, but make your own butter. So,
Well, one aspect to consider some rest from is preaching, and to the point of getting other guys in the pulpit. So it's like I talked to a pastor last week who's a pastor of a 3,000 member church in Charlotte, big mega church, and he said his personnel committee requires that he preaches 47 out of 52 Sundays, and they have 3 services every Sunday. So 3 mornings, 3 times a morning, and he can't do less. And he's almost 60, and he was telling me he was concerned about his ability to keep doing this. And I was like, you got to go back to your personnel committee and try to help them understand, 1, for your own health and longevity, 2, just for getting other men in the pulpit. A 3,000 member church, he said he's only got 1 other staff pastor that is good at preaching on Sunday morning. The rest are more administratively wired and things and whatnot. So it's like some of that is convincing church members, hey, you're not. It's not just here for this one man, and he's good. So there's got to be members willing to give space for other guys to develop. So for me, where I settled in, we got some more assistant pastors and whatnot. I've settled in between 38 to 40 out of 52. And so I will have. I won't preach, but I will be there. The 31st of December, I won't preach. The next week, which is the 7th, and then the 14th, we've got Ryan Hutchinson from Southeastern Seminary in Pillar coming in to preach. Those 3 weeks will give me a chance. I found that planning for the next year is terrible to do in November, December. It's like the busiest time of the year in life, and it's a terrible time to plan for the next year. So it allows me to get past that rush, get on the ground, get our family back going in our normal rhythm routines, give my brain capacity towards planning, which benefits the church, and then other brothers are getting those opportunities to preach as well. So that's been useful for me.
I like, as far as some of the intern stuff, I do like Mark Dever's model of taking summer off from that kind of work, and also the Christmas time he takes completely off. There's no intern stuff, I think, in December at all. But there's also this, I want to speak to that brother you were addressing there. There's this pressure that, well, they've got this program and they've got this program. I've got to have this program. And you may just need to focus on creating, doing discipling really well first, right? At the fundamental level in the church, so that your church would be a good, hospitable place to eventually, Lord, would entrust you with the next phase, the next situation. But I see a lot of guys that I know good and well, like you're neglecting something to keep all of that going. And you might fool some, I know better. And you're either dropping the ball big time as a shepherd and caring for the fold, or other particular things, or caring for your family, to keep all of this extra stuff going and keep yourself up front, keep yourself on a platform. That's something you got to look out for. And I just see a lot of guys burning themselves out. Dear friend of mine, pastors in New York, he is half dead, and I've been telling him, you are burnt out, and you're about to be in trouble. You need to rethink what's going on here.
Yeah, this is where church members need to serve their pastors. And I've had conversations, and that's one of the fun things to do that I'm doing when I'm traveling in churches. Sometimes I'll have conversations with church members and say, you've got to watch out for your pastor. You presume your pastor can hit the accelerator and drive the 80 all the time. He cannot do that. The day's going to come, exactly what Garrett's saying, where something's going to break. And so this is where, watch out for your pastor. Make sure whatever systems, like the story you just told, it makes me mad. I'm 69 years old. I pushed it hard, but I wasn't preaching. I preached twice a Sunday, but not 3 morning services. At that age, I think that's cruel to do that to that pastor. I think that church is sinning against him. Now, I'm making a bold statement. I don't know these folks, but I think they're sinning against him by expecting more than he can physically and mentally handle. The church has a responsibility to not only compensate, but to give some regulations within the framework of ministry to make sure that their pastor has ample time to be able to stop. And some of that's vacation, some of that's sabbatical. One thing that our church added way down the road was a week for planning. And that was a recommendation from one of our elders, and I thought, man, that is a good idea. So a whole week, I had no other responsibilities. I could focus on planning. A week for personal enrichment. Just that. And then, I'd go to some conferences and all that. But those 2 weeks added to vacation time and then working sabbatical in. Now, it took 25 years to get to that point to where the church finally started seeing some of that. I'm encouraging churches, don't wait 25 years because it takes a toll on a guy and on his family. So, yeah.
I just want to speak to that because I just went through a season of pastoral burnout. I was preaching 150 to 200 times a year and working 2 other jobs and trying to take care of the congregation. The problem, and I think Billy could probably relate to this, is most church members have no idea how much effort it takes to prepare sermon.
That's exactly
I was gonna
right.
say that,
Yeah.
they need to put it in your shoes for a week,
And-
just follow you around.
And not just the 15 to 20 hours to prepare the sermon. If you look at the budget, there is no honorarium budget to pay for someone to give you a Sunday off.
Yep.
And so you have to find someone who's willing to preach for you when you don't have anybody in your church who can preach for you. And so you're going to then have to pay out of pocket to fly somebody down to preach for you that you trust because you're trying to. So I would like y'all to speak to that situation, because if you're in a church that is healthy, it works. If you're in a situation that I've been in and others have been in, where you're trying to make one healthy, like I went 10 years and missed, besides being sick, I think I missed one Sunday, because there was no one. And it's horrible, you know, and I'm not complaining, because you love the people, but I think it'd be good, especially for church members, if you talk about how many hours it takes to prepare a sermon for each of you, how much they should expect to pay for an honorarium for someone to give, you know, Billy a vacation. Like if he's gonna take a Sunday off, hey, you need to pay somebody X number of dollars for a church this size. You need to put that in the budget. I just think, I'm having to go through that with my church right now.
Yeah.
My burnout time.
Back a couple of years ago, Kira and I were in the hills of North Carolina, and we were on sabbatical, so we visited a church. We pulled up in the parking lot. It was a church plant, and I got out. I had my Bible in my hand. I tried not to look real preachery, you know. I just had my jacket on, no sport coat, no tie or anything, and this lady came out, looked like she was in her early 30s, and she didn't know Kira and me from Adam's House Cat, and she said, "Have you come to be an elder in our church?" I mean, that was the first thing she said to us. Literally, she didn't know I was a pastor. She didn't even know that. So I found out more about what was going on with this guy. So I talked with one, he had just recently joined the Pillar Network, so I talked with one of our other Pillar Networks that are Pillar churches that is training guys, and said, you need to volunteer some of the guys you're training to preach to go down, tell them, you don't have to pay him, we're gonna pay him, you don't have to even give him mileage, we're gonna take care of that, you just feed him lunch and give him feedback. This is what I would encourage, and I want to try to cultivate that kind of thing with our churches so that we can help each other out. So if you got somebody that can come in and will faithfully preach the word, then you send them to Daniel's church. You say, you don't have to pay anything. We've got everything covered. Just buy him lunch or take him to somebody's house and feed him and give him feedback on something.
Yeah, and that's so helpful, speaking to that. I mean, really right now, because you get, like Daniel saying, he had a couple elders, but again, it turned out poorly, and anyway, we don't speak to all that, but faithful men, and that's what's tough is, but, so his scenario, and now Ferlin's scenario with this, a replant, where he's the only pastor, he's the only elder, the only one there preaching right now, and so and he's doing music. He's music as well. And so a lot on him, and so I love what you're saying there, that idea of partner together, connect together, you get somebody that you can trust, and it's giving guys reps.
Gets preaching reps.
Gets the reps for those guys that maybe it might be harder here. In this room currently, Tom preaches for us here. Ashton preaches for us here. I think that we'll see some other men, possibly ones that are in here, that would desire that, and they could be used in those ways. And the church catching that vision and saying, well, we'll sing hymns that Sunday with just, with the piano with somebody else leading. So Tom can go to Ferlin's and preach for him, give him a rest, gives Tom an opportunity, connects us to this church that, closer with the church that we're a part of planting anyway, and build that. And then you meet Daniel, hear Daniel's story and say, hey, if you need anybody, just let us know, right? Being gracious with our people, right?
Yeah, that's that generosity. Like you've got the guys at Lake Butler. You got those resources, but it helped. This Ryan Bishop. I think you guys know Ryan Bishop down in Graham, Texas. One time he came through our church, probably 7-8 years ago, and a couple of our elders recognized him and knew who he was, and great pastor down in Texas, and he was just visiting the DC area on sabbatical, and he began to pull my elders aside and give them a talking to. I did not ask him to do that, but he began to challenge them. I was, at first I was like, what? He did what? I did not know he was going to do that. And, you know, I would love to, we would have to light a fire under Billy and Jason and those guys and get them over there and talk to some of your leaders.
Well, I'm good now.
Yeah, but
I
like,
have probably 5 guys that preach for me now.
okay, yeah.
10 years of.
But you bring up a good thing that a lot of, getting churches involved and other ministers to speak in and say, hey, how are you doing taking care of that? Are you looking after him? Because I never heard that language like this before until I heard, I think, Ryan Townsend talk about their stewardship of Mark Dever. And Mark's one of those guys, I'm sure at times, more than once, they've had to pull him back because he's just outpoured. And he is a freak in giftedness. It's weird, it's strange, the going that man does. But I heard them talking carefully about, we need to steward him, and we need to be able to, your leaders need to look at their pastor and say, okay, do we want him to, be this short-term, great explosive work and then dies off and the next man up, or we're gonna help this man also finish as he's trying to get us to finish?
Yeah, I think that I've had one sabbatical. It was hard to get. A lot of Southern Baptist churches don't give their pastors sabbaticals, and I came out of a church where that was established in DC, and when I came down to Charlotte, I just thought, oh yeah, this is great. Let's put this forward. This won't be hard, and it was a pretty big debate whether or not to give a sabbatical. I was a bit surprised by it, and I think the average person will think, well, I work hard and I don't get a sabbatical. Why should my pastor get a sabbatical? And some of that is maybe not understanding the nature of the work. When you're a pastor, a lot of people see maybe they look at your role and they mainly see the authority you have, and they don't see necessarily the vulnerability you have. Maybe you give up things to go and serve. And I shared with my elders, like, when you have a hard week at work, church is your refuge, and you get to come in on Sundays, and it's a place of refreshment. When a pastor has a hard week at work, the church is where you're serving. And you're taking on that burden willingly, but it takes its toll on you. And then you throw in the craziness of 2020 and all that stuff. Like, I got a 5 weeks sabbatical, but I came back and told my elders, hey, I think we should give each one of our pastors some time off just to recover from COVID and what that was. And trust that as you minister your pastor, that's just going to sow back into the congregation and be good for the people in your church. So I think you're asked about sermon prep time. But I spend probably about 25 hours a week. I think that's about standard for what guys, 20, 25, what do you guys spend?
Yeah, I think that Southern Baptist churches think it sounds crazy because I have met those pastors who, I just went about 6-7 hours study. And of course I'm sitting there going, I can tell. I heard what you put forward. And I get why they have that attitude. But when one of our elders, he works for the government, he spent a season with us on the elder board, going through just conflict and dumpster fire after dumpster fire, plus me challenging him one Sunday in the middle of all he had to go on to write a full sermon. And he came back with a paper to the church and said, oh yeah, this is no joke. I understand more now having trying to write that sermon while I'm going through this and doing that. And it helped him articulate to the church. This isn't like the guy who's writing a 6-hour sermon.
Yeah, earlier.
6-hour prep.
Early in ministry, I was probably doing 18 to 20 hours for Sunday morning and probably 5 to 7 for Sunday night. As I preached a lot more, I preached several thousand sermons. By that time, I could do my prep more 12 to 15 hours. But when I do it, I'm really intense. Don't get in my way.
Another option is go to hotsermons.com and you can buy their sermons. You guys have been mostly what you've been hearing is Dave's most recent sermon series from me. So.
So what you guys are saying, just so I can clarify in easy terms, it takes more than one full workday for you to prepare your sermon. Easily,
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Uninterrupted.
uninterrupted.
I mean, I
2
work,
workdays.
I work on my sermon every day, you know, between studying, writing, checking with the commentaries, and then going over your rough draft and kind of doing some things out loud Sunday morning, some final, yeah, every day.
I say it because I'm patting myself on the back to not feel so bad that if Billy asks me to preach and that takes me 2 weeks to just get there, I'm like, okay, if I do this every week, there's just not enough days to prepare for the 2 weeks it takes to get one sermon. Is this normal? And you're talking 10 sermons total under my belt, so it's not like it's everyday stuff, but, okay, that's normal, I guess.
That's actually been the biggest wake-up call for me, from going from preaching every once in a while to now, there's the next sermon.
That next.
Now Sunday comes every week.
I mean, that's, okay, whoa, this is, yeah, and I think that is something to where I wanna push in a little bit towards Billy. Like, here you got Jacob. Minus he's my son, so take that out of the picture. But he's getting ready, you know, you're bringing him up to go potentially do a church plant. So that needs to be in there, him being able, at least writing sermons. I mean, that needs to be you know, and given the opportunity in the evenings or Wednesdays or whatever to preach. Because that was, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out with me, okay, how am I doing this plus making sure everything else is taking place that I'm called to do? You know, I think that was the biggest shocker for me.
Yeah. And that's really, and when you get in the binder, the handout that we have for what we're trying to do with our internship, on there it says preach a sermon series. That doesn't mean it's going to be a Sunday morning sermon series, but you have, I think, brothers may disagree, you have to feel that pressure of Sunday coming again. But the church has to have space for that to happen. And really, I mean, he could come in here and say, okay, on Thursdays you're going to record yourself, preach every Thursday. And he'd feel that, but not the same with real feedback, real people sitting there that you're really going to speak in front of and feel that. And so, again, goes back to that conversation of, does the church embrace this whole idea? Do we view this as part of what we're called to do? If so, how do we make space for it? And what are good ways to do that? And that's what they're helping us with.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how we would do this with our guys, especially the ones that could do the elongated, more residential approach. And I'd have them preach a 10-week expositional series. And I remember one of the guys he was working in Memphis, and he's preaching Sunday night the expositional series. And about week 4 or 5, he said, "Hey brother, do you think you might could preach Sunday night? I kind of need a break." And I said, "No," because Sunday comes every week, and you're going to find out when you start pastoring that it's going to happen. He's pastoring now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that, and he probably thought I was really cruel and heartless, but I thought, you got to feel that. You know, it's one thing, Tom, when you got 2 weeks to prepare a sermon or a month. I mean, some of the guys would know 3 months ahead of time they were going to preach. Well, duh, come on. That's cream puff. To be able to, and Beth's saying that after preaching a bunch.
Right.
But it's hard. But you know, it's coming like that, and then when you're doing it, I mean, like Daniel's talking about 150, 200 times a year, bam, bam, bam. You're always thinking of it there. So that's part of what we're doing. I'm talking too much.
No, but
I love all this.
Please. You can't be talking too much while you're here. Talk. Come on, other questions, other things you want to, yeah, Jacob. Sorry, we had Jacob.
That's fine. So in this, it's kind of what Miss Heather kind of going off of just the kind of burnout for the congregation. What's some words of wisdom, advice that if you're raising up men and just creating relationships, and then they're having to send them out, because that's something I've kind of observed and seen. People are kind of afraid to pour themselves into our family because like you're going to leave in a year. Like I don't want to like get attached to your family and your kids, and y'all have to leave. What's some wisdom to pour into to that?
It goes back similar to the kind of mindset that we were dealing with our sister over here, thinking about how they view their life in the church. And that any family could be gone from our church in a blink. Our job is to do our job faithfully to every member of the church, and because our days could be gone. And so I think that's what we want to coach the church in, and say, we do know so-and-so maybe we're, Lord willing, will be gone in a year. That means we need to double up our efforts on pouring into them, blessing them, because we got our minds on heaven. We're thinking about eternity. So just constantly keeping that from the church.
Our church experienced a little bit of a different challenge. We don't want to let people go. So when we've sent guys out, you'd have thought someone was dying. And it's like, hey, it's okay, we missed them, but we don't need to keep everyone here. And these men, they actually came here for seminary, and even trying to tell them and their wives, because they'll come, and Charlotte's a wonderful city to be in, and they have fun in our church. Hey, the goal is for most of you to not stay here. There may be some church plant opportunities, different things here, but most of you are going to be going other places, and this is the Christian ministry. It's about taking the gospel into the earth. So I think for us, we're having to help our congregation have that vision and commitment to, hey, we're investing in them to say no.
Yeah, and I'm just put it shortly. That's why we want to teach our churches that we are a mentoring church, not just a mentoring pastor, a mentoring church.
That's good.
Good question. Others? Just a little bit longer here.
When Furman and Chrissy left, it was like we had a death as a family. We wanted to see them grow and do well. It was so hard, even though it's not that far. We still see them. It was so hard, but we were so, I want to use the word proud, but, blessed that we could send somebody to pastor that church that needed revamping the whole thing.
Yeah.
But we certainly miss them.
One of the guys that we sent out, and I loved, he's the guy that I did the Shepherding Pastor book with, Rich Haddon, and that was 12 years ago now, I think. But most of our church came over for his installation. We dismissed our afternoon service, the evening service, whenever it was, and we had more people than they did.
Yeah.
And it was such a sweet time, because it gave our church a consciousness. Oh, we've been investing in him and pouring into him. Now he's going to be shepherding this church. That is pretty cool. And so people would pray for him, ask about him, and all that.
Yeah. I think for the pastors in here and things too, you do want to, the question on health and rhythm and taking breaks and things. I think something that I've learned and seen, and a lot of you guys are our members anyway, but other brothers that are here and things, you have to make sure that the congregation doesn't get worn out too. Of new people, hard situation. Again, we've had some interns that haven't panned out in the sense of what we expected. Still kingdom win, but their investment.
That's hard on the church.
It is. It's hard on the church, and you've got to keep that in mind too, and say, maybe we need to pump the brakes for a year or something like that, or 6 months, whatever it may be, just to help, them get a deal with that as well. And then another comment I'd make, and maybe you guys have seen this, like with Jacob's situation, he wants it. How do I know he wants it? He's living in a camper on the property of one of our deacons, and he gets $500 a month from us. He wants to see if this is what God has for him. That type of sacrifice, when you have 3 boys living in the camper, you can see that in them. Versus, hey, we've got $60,000, come do our internship, right? And a house for you or something. How do you guys navigate bringing somebody in if they're coming in from the outside? How do you gauge who should come in and who shouldn't, and the application process? But how do you gauge that? That might be helpful. for someone considering bringing
Well,
someone?
I mean, in our setting, we have a lot of seminary guys who show up, and the lunch they have with me, I know this is coming every time. Hey, can we grab lunch? And I know exactly what they're gonna ask me. Hey, can I have an internship? And it's because they're told they need to get an internship before they graduate. And I just was like, oh yeah, we do internships with guys, and we do this cohort, but that'll be later on. Like, just, if this is the church you want to join, come to the membership class, join this church, come in and be a good member. If you want to be a Baptist pastor one day, you need to learn how to be a good Baptist member. Just come and do that, and then, man, we will invest in you, but don't expect that this is going to happen in the first 2 semesters of seminary. So we have more of that, of like, hey, bring them in to see if they want it. Because if what they want is immediate, like, reps, like, we don't know you. Why would we put you up to have you preach right now? Like, we want a chance to get to know you, and that's what we will do. So I think it's that. It's not having, giving a chance to see the initiative. I mean, that's hunger, and it's taking the initiative.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, I think our church would, we're only, out there on the outside of La Plata, which is, with a weird, Baptist church in town. But our people would, they would love that kind of guy. They would be working to try to do more for them. They would inspire them. And I've seen Mark bring in guys who he thought it might spur them on if they come to the internship, and they didn't, in that way that they were never, they never heard of a pastor. They didn't, but they did it anyway. And I think he's learned from doing that. He doesn't really do that anymore, but he used to in earlier times. And I can think of a few guys who came through like that. But finding a guy who's that, persistent and hungry and dedicated and learning, there's something very appealing to a congregation about that. They see that. And do you guys, can they go to RTS and not be a member of a church? Southeastern, you have to be a member of a church, don't you?
Well, they would be members. They would be members where they came from, so they would count that. And Mark may have said this to you when you were an intern. He said our intern class. This was really it was a moment left of Mark on me, and I loved what he had to say to us. We had the weekender coming up, kind of conference like this, right? We had a whole weekend, and the interns were the ones who served. That means we had to be there at like 6 in the morning to brew coffee. We were there at midnight, restocking toilet paper in the bathrooms, doing all those things. And he looked at us in a stern voice. He goes, if I get a report from Karen over 9 Marks that you all have not been doing your jobs, not doing what you're doing, do not send me any requests for letters of recommendation to be a pastor after this is over. You're not fit to be a pastor if you're not ready to serve. And so I was like, okay, he's right. Like, we were there, that was our role. Our job was to serve. And if we were above that, then why were we preparing for pastoral ministry?
Yeah, when I was doing stuff like that in internship in college, my pastor said, "Welcome to the ministry." And now I thought, yeah, he's right, because you're doing all kinds of things. It's not the glamour of the pulpit. It was, for us, it was the glamour of hauling hot water to the baptistry and walking 30 yards with a big tub of hot water to go dump it in the baptistry, back and forth, back and forth. That was the glamour of the ministry.
I do think, I want to speak to, to encourage Jacob about this, and not to that he would find any self-righteousness in it, but I think you and I have talked about in the past, like, there are guys who finish school and are already entitled well, I need to be near this university, and I need this budget, and I need this kind of, like, it's not really a job I'm looking at. There's this, I'm like, you're not that great yet. Like, there's no way. Like, you don't even have common sense. I mean, you're saying that stuff out loud. You have a little lack of self-awareness. And so, a guy who's hungry and willing to work, that work ethic, to me, lends itself much more to maturity in the pulpit, maturity in shepherding. And God raised up more Jacobs in our churches.
Yeah.
If most of the Southern Baptist churches are the average attendance is 65 to 70, if that's
somewhere 65 to 70.
65. I mean, if that's what it is, then that's what most guys are stepping into. How great can it be to intern at a church roughly that size? to really see, because in ours, like what I put on there, there's things like cutting the grass, there's things like, again, ideally, you raise up deacons and elders. The church that they're going to, where they're gonna pastor, you might be shifting the church that direction, so guess what? You will be cutting the grass, you will be doing those things for a while until you train people up. And so again, churches, rural churches trying to do these things, these guys showing us it can be done. And then something that Dave says with Pillar Network, that he just talks about, if you're committed, if you believe in it, then start to take those steps and pray as a congregation, teach, and just start to step into it and watch God. Again, if this is what he's calling us to do, and it's the right time, you're not rushing and things like that, he'll bless it, and you'll figure out a way. Somebody will say, I've got a room they can stay in. Something will happen to move forward, but you gotta, if you're convinced of it, you gotta start to move that direction. I appreciate it, Dave. As many of you know, that's what happened with Jacob. I want to tell you guys that, though. We were in Scotland together, and Dave, if you get to know him, his personality, just looked right at Jacob, and he goes, so, you feel called to ministry, or what? And he's like, yeah, I think I do. That's great. So, really? Why don't you intern at his church? It's like, thanks, Dave. We appreciate that. And so then we started to talk about it. Yeah.
We were kilt shopping. You forgot that.
We were kilt shopping in Scotland. And Dave's like, yeah, and Jacob, your dad was an elder in that church and was raised up and sent out. And
He's good at that.
he's like, yeah, seems pretty simple. I don't know what are we doing here? Right? And that's his personality and things, but just that encouragement of, if you're convinced of it,
Yeah.
just take that step, start small, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But, that's good. Yeah. Any last things, guys? You got, yeah.
We're called to wash the feet.
Yeah.
And we forget that.
Yeah.
That's one, I can't remember which one that brought it up.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes that includes cleaning toilets, you know.
Just glory to God. Any last things in there? Miss Joni has
I
something.
got something. I just have to brag on our pastor.
No, you don't.
He hates it. I do. But let me just tell you, when the hurricane came through and wiped out half this town overnight, this church, I'll get greedy. This church came together to help this community like nobody's business. You wouldn't believe all the stuff that every person in this church came in to help with. Little things, big things, everything. This man, that man, Wayne, all of them, just 24/7, whatever it took to get people back in their homes and fed and clothed and have a roof over their head. It was phenomenal. You'll never see it again as long as you live, but it was just, we're needy sheets, we're needy people who go to church. I feel sorry for them, but in that incident, all that was gone, and we just came to be together, and it was just,
Praise the Lord.
I know, it was.
Yeah, that was just the Lord's kindness and work to where it like you said, it was Him working through the body.
Yeah.
Ephesians 4, the equipping, and the Lord just gave us that opportunity, and it was a blessing. So definitely thank you.